Yo, book nerds, it's 80 degrees outside, my AC is broken, and I'm wearing my Roma Italia sweatshirt just for this video because I love you guys. I'm doing it for the aesthetic, so you better appreciate that. I finished reading the Aeneid by Virgil. My version was translated by Christopher Pierce Cranch. It is translated from Latin. Virgil lived in Rome, in ancient Rome. This is an ancient classic. This is an epic poem, and this edition maintains the poetry format. It's actually kind of impressive. This edition is written in iambic pentameter, so it is very much poetry. This poem by Virgil is often considered to be a response to Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey. So it is following a lot of the same characters except through the Roman lens instead of the Greek lens. Virgil also lived later than Homer. Homer lived in the 8th century BC, while Virgil lived around 70 to 19 BC. In the intro for this book, it says that Virgil was not quite finished with this epic poem when he died. He had finished like a draft, but he still had some editing to do at the very end of it. So the last book or so doesn't feel as polished as the rest of the epic. It is said that Virgil actually wanted this destroyed when he died because he considered it unfinished, even though it is a complete story. But it was obviously not destroyed. It has survived the test of time for over 2,000 years. And it was very cool to participate in that tradition. Like I said, this translation is kind of impressive because of the iambic pentameter. However, I will say that it did make some of it kind of challenging. I don't necessarily think it needed to be in iambic pentameter, and it did kind of mess with some of the syntax and some of the flow of the poem. Because the translator needed to fit the iambic pentameter, sometimes there's some awkward phrasing, there's some tenses that go back and forth, like verb tenses. For one part it'll be in present, and then in the next line it'll be in past, and that really irritated me, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't like the back and forth jump from past tense to present tense to past tense to present tense in the same sentence sometimes, so that was a little jarring. But overall, I did really enjoy this book. At first I didn't like it more than I liked Homer's works. I was kind of skeptical at first. It also did take me a little while to get used to the Roman names for all the gods and everyone, because I obviously just read 3 books with all the Greek names, so I was very used to the Greek names for everything, and now we switched to Roman. But as I kept reading, I did kind of get sucked in, and I would say like this is right up there with Homer's works. Like, I think I love the Iliad the best, but the Aeneid and the Odyssey, they're kind of neck and neck for me, honestly. I'm not sure which one I like better. It might be this one though. Honestly, I really wish I had this book with me when I was in Rome. I think it would have been so cool to be reading this while I was there. Because Virgil lived there, there were references to places, to hills, to parts of Rome that I saw, and so it would have been really cool to be reading this while I was there. But alas, so what is this about? It's called the Aeneid, and it is about Aeneas, who was a Trojan, and when Troy falls, he leaves. And Virgil kind of combines the Iliad and the Odyssey and kind of puts his own spin on it. So we're following Aeneas, and he goes on a journey, a long journey to find a new home. So it's kind of like the Odyssey. We're following a very long journey. And then there is also another war that Aeneas takes part in. So that part of the story is kind of like the Iliad. So it's kind of reversed, and it's just really good. I really liked it. Virgil also follows Homer's example and calls on the muses multiple times in this story, and it sets the stage. I will read the beginning lines for you just so you can kind of see that it's very similar to how Homer had done it. I sing of arms and of the man who first came from the coasts of Troy to Italy, and the Lavinian shores exiled by fate. Much was he tossed about upon the lands, and on the ocean by supernal powers, because of cruel Juno's sleepless wrath. Many things he also suffered in war, until he built a city and brought his gods into Latium, from which came the Latin race, the Alban sires and walls of lofty Rome. So that right there, that opening stanza tells you that this is about a man who had a really long journey and had a war and founded Rome, what would eventually become Rome. And then the second stanza goes, O Muse, tell the causes for what affront and why incense the Queen of Gods compelled a hero renowned for his piety to undergo such sufferings and such toils. Is there such anger in celestial minds? So again, calling on the muses and asking to tell the tale. So when this book starts out, it has been 7 years since Troy's fall. So the first book kind of tells like what's going on right now, where Aeneas is, and then you get to book 2. There are 12 books in this story, and then book 2 kind of recaps what has happened and how we got from the fall of Troy to the current point on his adventures 7 years later. You do get more about the fall of Troy, and you get to learn about the Trojan horse, which I had been waiting for, man. I was ready to learn about the Trojan horse, finally. We got mentions of it from Homer, but we really get into it with Virgil. This was where I got invested. I was ready for that. So I really enjoyed it, and I'm obsessed with Troy, and so I was really glad to get these descriptions. Now I want to talk a little more in depth, so if you don't want to know anything else, I would just say you should read this. I would definitely read the Iliad and the Odyssey first and then read this. I don't think you really need to read the Odyssey before this. That's by Aeschylus, but it doesn't hurt. It does give a little more of a fuller picture, but I really did enjoy this. But I'm going to talk more in depth, so spoiler alert if you don't want to know more than that. So I found it really fascinating when Aeneas is recapping what happened at Troy, and he talks about seeing Helen and his hatred for her, and he wants to kill her because he's watching Troy burn, and he sees Helen, who's the cause of this, and he's like, I am going to kill her. And it says that he saw her and fire raged in my heart, and through me ran an impulse to avenge my fallen country and inflict on her the penalty deserved. Shall she indeed in safety see her Sparta in the lands of Greece and move like a triumphant queen? Shall she behold her husband, parents, home, and sons, attended by a Trojan troop and Phrygian slaves? Shall Priam fall by the sword? Shall Troy be burned and all her shores distill Dardanian blood? Not so. For though there be no glory in a woman's punishment, nor any praise in such a victory, yet shall I be commended to have quenched such crime. And it will please me to have wreaked my vengeance, and the ashes thus appease of slaughtered countrymen. So he's like, there's no honor in killing her, but I need to avenge my people. She is the one who caused all this. And then all of a sudden his mom appears, Aeneas's mother, who is Aphrodite, Venus. In here she's referred to as Venus, and Venus says, O son, what grief arouses in your breast such untamed wrath? What rage is this? Where has your reverence gone for us? Look rather where you may have left your sire Anchises, that's his dad, encumbered with old age, whither your wife Cruessa be alive, Ascanius too your son, whom on all sides the Grecian troops surround, and whom unless my care of them oppose, the flames will now have swept away, and hostile swords have slain. It's not the Spartan Helen's hated face, nor faulty Paris, but the inclement gods, the gods, I say, who overthrow this power, and from its lofty summit lay Troy low. So Venus is saying, go find your father, go find your wife and your son, and leave Troy. It's not Helen's fault. The gods have ordained this. And I find it so interesting because Venus is the reason this all happened. Venus is the one that got Paris and Helen together and started this whole war. And her son is Aeneas, and Aeneas wants to kill Helen, so he'd be like kind of going against his own mom there, who's a goddess, so then he'd be going against the gods. But he listens to her and he doesn't do it, and he leaves. This also gives Aeneas kind of an honorable out. Like, he is fleeing battle with his family, and that normally would be considered cowardly and shameful, but a goddess has told him to leave. So he's honoring the gods by getting his family and getting other people and just getting out and saving themselves. Troy has fallen. There's no point in staying. They would just die if they stayed. So that's in book 2. Then in book 3, we kind of get the Odyssey of this story. We get them, that's where it starts, and they start sailing all over and they have adventures. They even sail past Ithaca, which is where Odysseus lives or is from. Odysseus, or Ulysses as they refer to him in here. So they even kind of sail by, and that's kind of Virgil's nod to, like, this is the Odyssey. This is my version of the Odyssey. And I just find that very amusing. We also run into Andromache in book 3, and we find out what happened to her, because if you have read the Iliad, you know that Andromache was so worried that if Hector died, she would be enslaved and her children would be killed, or she might also be killed. And we find out her fate because Aeneas runs into her. We also in book 3 get a recap of Ulysses, Odysseus, and the Cyclops, although this was interesting because this side of it kind of spins it negative, since, you know, we're getting the Trojan side of it. So they don't like the Greeks. They don't like Odysseus. Another huge, I'm going to kind of jump forward now a little bit, but another big thing that this story is known for is Aeneas and Dido. They have this kind of like whirlwind romance. They fall in love. She's the queen of this land that he's landed at, and they're gonna settle there. But that's not what the gods have in store for them. The gods want Aeneas to go on to Italia and establish himself there so that Rome can come into existence in the future. And so Dido, she's such a tragic figure in this story because Aeneas has to leave her. He doesn't want to, but the gods have literally ordered him to. And like, imagine how scary that would be if you love someone and then a god tells you you have to leave them behind. Like, how do you disobey a god? And how do you leave the one you love? Like, it's a very tragic thing. But I didn't really like Aeneas in this scene because he really has no remorse. He's just like, I gotta do what I gotta do. I don't want to leave, but I have to. And he doesn't seem to offer much like solace, or even offer to like bring her along. Like, it makes me like him a little less in this scene. Also, like I said, he had a wife who he also didn't take care of, and she ended up dying. Like, he doesn't treat his lovers the greatest. Like, he didn't make sure his wife got out of Troy. He left her behind, she died, and now he leaves Dido. Yeah. But this brings up something important, an important theme. Like, what is fated? Like, what can we actually control and what is fate? How much do the gods mess in their lives? Like, how much can Aeneas actually control? Dido, like I said, is this tragic figure. She ends up offing herself because of her broken heart. Before she does that, she has the first boyfriend bonfire. She gets all of Aeneas's things and burns them. And her empire is kind of left in shambles after Aeneas comes. Aeneas is kind of like the Greek to her Troy. he is her downfall. And that theme gets repeated later in this story as well. Like I said, like, I didn't really like Aeneas for some of this. Like, he's not the greatest person sometimes, but Virgil does such a great job of writing him in such a way that even though he does these things, like, you still do care, and you care for the Trojans. It's kind of complicated because he's like not the greatest person, but you care about him. It's messy. He's definitely a morally gray, complex character. He's not always so noble. Aeneas also has to make a journey to the underworld like Odysseus does in the Odyssey, but we get a much deeper look at the underworld in Virgil's story, which I found very cool. In book 6, we get a description of the underworld, which just kind of gives me the chills. Hence downward leads the way to Tartarus and Acheron, a gulf of turbid mire, here foams with vortex vast, and belches forth into Cocytus, all its floods of sand. By these dread rivers waits the ferryman, squalid and grim, Charon, his grisly beard uncombed and thick, his eyes are flaming lamps. A filthy garment from his shoulders hangs. And it goes on, but it's just like creepy. It's creepy. It would be creepy to see the boatman like standing there and everything's dark and oof. It's creepy. Very spooky, like giving Halloween vibes. There are also, to contrast the spooky, you get beautiful description of Elysium, which is like Tartarus is like the hell and Elysium is like the heaven of the Greek and Roman mythology. But anyway, I feel like I'm rambling and jumping around a bit, but I just have all these thoughts in my head and I want to share them. So after more adventures and after Aeneas does all these things and travels to the underworld and comes back, then he eventually finally does get to Italia and he makes peace with the current king, and that peace lasts like this long. The king wants to marry his daughter to Aeneas and kind of combine themselves, but there is another suitor that wants to marry the king's daughter, and so there's war. Turnus is the other suitor, and he's got a lot of people backing him. Some of the gods are even backing him and stirring up trouble. Juno, I'm looking at you, Juno. And so we get another war, and then this is where the Iliad version comes in. This is Virgil's Iliad once Aeneas is at Italia. Aeneas is gonna fight for this land because the gods told him he needs to. So he doesn't want to fight, he doesn't want to have war, but he needs to be here. The gods told him this is where he's supposed to be. So if someone's gonna try and keep him out, he's gonna fight. This is where a lot of the descriptions of Roma come in, and we get a lot of that because Virgil lived in Rome. And so he's like, even though Aeneas didn't live in Rome wasn't there yet, like there's some like visions of the future and there's descriptions of Rome, and Virgil's like purposefully putting all that history into the story, and it's really cool. But this is the new Troy. Again, that theme comes up. And Aeneas is like Achilles. And he's basically like, they're like the Greeks. And the Italians are the Trojans now. And they're fighting each other. And Turnus is like the Hector of this story. And then there's even a Patroclus in a boy named Pallas, a young fighter named Pallas. And so it's like history repeating itself. Pallas is killed and Aeneas gets so mad about it and needs to avenge Pallas and kill Turnus. Pallas is killed by Turnus. And so yeah, it's so similar. So similar. Aeneas also carries a shield that was made by the gods just like Achilles did. And so there's another parallel there. And on his shield, we get a nice description of his shield. And that shield also depicts Roman history. And so that's really cool too. There's a scene where Aeneas puts this shield that has all these depictions of Roman history on it that is going to be Aeneas's future, Virgil's past, but Aeneas's future. And he puts this shield on his shoulders, and so it's like symbolizing Aeneas carrying this load. He is the foundation of Roman society, and none of this would have happened if it weren't for him. There was a line I want to share with you that I really liked. During all the fighting, Turnus is talking about like how he's probably gonna die, and he knows that. And he says, "To everyone his day stands fixed by fate. The term of mortal life is brief and irretrievable to all. But to extend the period of its fame by noble actions is its virtue's work." So we all die. It's going to happen to everyone. You can't get time back, but by being noble and doing what we can, that is what matters. I liked that. Thought that was beautiful. So Turnus and Aeneas are fighting, and they keep fighting, and it's kind of neck and neck. Like I said, it's like Achilles and Hector, and they're going at it, and their fighting continues until Juno allows it to stop. Jupiter, Zeus, he goes to Juno and is like, "Come on, they've been fighting long enough. You know that Rome needs to be established, so Aeneas has to win, Turnus has to lose." And she's like, "Fine, I will let Turnus die as long as you promise that Troy dies with Turnus. Aeneas and the other Trojans, they will become Italians. Like, they are not going to make a new Troy. They're going to build a Latin nation, not a Trojan nation." She says, "Yet one thing I do beseech, for Latium and your royal seed no law of destiny forbids. When peace is made by this auspicious marriage, be it so, and laws and leagues unite the hostile tribes, do not ask the Latins to change their ancient name. Do not let them be called Trojans and Teucri, nor change their speech or dress. Let Latium be. Let Alban monarchs through the centuries reign. Let Rome's posterity attain their might through virtue of Italia. Troy has fallen. Then let it fall forever with its name." And that is very powerful. And I really liked that. And yes, Jupiter says, yes, Troy has fallen. And so that's just, yeah, it's just cool. And it kind of helps explain why, if Aeneas did really go to Rome, what would become Rome, why Trojans, like why they don't have like a rebirth there. Troy is dead. So Aeneas does beat Turnus, and I find it really interesting though at the end. The ending line, before Turnus dies, he kind of like begs for peace. He begs that his father can have his body, and Aeneas, he kind of like forbears and like thinks about not killing him, but then he remembers Pallas and then he kills him. And then it says about Turnus, "Relaxed the limbs lay cold, and with a groan down to the shades the soul indignant fled." Turnus's soul is indignant. Like, that is an interesting choice of words. That would suggest that what Aeneas did was unjust, but the gods ordained it. So was it unjust for him to kill him? He was avenging Pallas. Why was it unjust? Why was he indignant about it? It's such an interesting way to end the poem, and maybe this is part of the polishing that Virgil still needed to do, but it does make you think, like, is this a turning point for Aeneas? Was this wrong? Up until this point, did he have the gods okay to do everything he did until he killed Turnus? Like, why is it indignant? Why is it shameful? Why is that bad that Turnus died? Anyway, I think we've talked enough. I've gone through the entire book and given you all my thoughts. I really did enjoy this. I think you should read it. I would love for you to drop down in the comments and let me know your thoughts, and we can chat. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll talk to you next Monday. I'm about to go change out of this sweatshirt because I wore this just for you. You know, the things I do for you guys. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for talking books with me.